Bleak Hollow wasn't on any map. I'd only heard about it from an old friend who swore by its promise of wealth and luxury. When I arrived, the village looked like it had been forgotten by time. Most houses were old, with moss-covered roofs and narrow, winding streets that seemed to go nowhere. The mayor, a thin, gray-haired man with a cold, unsettling smile, welcomed me with a document, a thick contract on yellowed paper. "You'll be handsomely rewarded here," he said, handing me an old-fashioned fountain pen. "But you must follow one rule: after sunset, you must remain inside. No matter what you hear, do not look outside, and do not leave until morning." I laughed, thinking it was a local superstition, but he wasn't smiling. His eyes held a darkness that chilled me. Still, the promise of a life filled with luxuries was too tempting, so I signed. That night, I settled into my new home, finding gifts as promised: a shiny new watch, stacks of cash, and even a car parked outside. When night fell, I followed the rule and locked myself in. It was silent at first, but just past midnight, I heard it, a soft, scratching noise at the door. It was subtle, but as the minutes passed, it grew louder, turning into a maddening scrape, like nails dragging down the wood. The sound was relentless, clawing at my nerves. Suddenly, the scratching stopped, replaced by something worse, a sloshing, squelching sound, as if something wet and heavy were being dragged across my doorstep. I gripped my pillow, trying not to imagine what could make such a sound, but in my mind, I saw it, a grotesque creature, dripping with viscous, dark fluid, leaving a slimy trail as it moved. The hours crawled by, and the noises only grew louder, turning into thumps and wet smacks against the walls. When dawn finally broke, silence returned, but as I opened the door, my stomach turned. Fresh blood was smeared across the doorstep, thick and dark, pooling in sticky puddles. Deep claw marks gouged the wood, and something foul lingered in the air, like rotting meat. The next morning, I left my house in a daze, my mind still reeling from the horrors of the night. As I walked through the village, the residents avoided my gaze, their faces pale and hollow. I approached an older woman at the market, her hands shaking as she placed vegetables into a sack. I asked her about the sounds I'd heard. Her eyes widened, and she muttered, "Don't ask questions. Follow the rule. That's the only way to survive." The rest of the day passed in grim silence. As evening fell, I locked myself in again, drawing the curtains and barricading the door with furniture. But this time, the noises started sooner. A heavy thud sounded against the wall, followed by more sloshing and dragging noises. I lay frozen, listening to something scrape and tear at the walls, my heart pounding as it shifted to the windows. Suddenly, I heard a wet, sickening slap against the glass, as if something flesh-like was pressed against it. Then came the voice, a guttural, distorted whisper calling my name, each syllable drawn out in a low, rasping tone. "Come out. I'm waiting." My stomach lurched as the voice grew louder, the whisper slithering into my ears. Against my better judgment, I leaned toward the window, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever was outside. But I stopped myself just in time, remembering the mayor's warning. I gripped my head, trying to drown out the voice as it turned into an agonized scream that echoed through the walls. When dawn finally arrived, the village was silent. I opened the door to find a trail of blood leading from my doorstep to the center of the village, where a mutilated animal carcass lay, torn and shredded, its organs strewn across the cobblestone. The residents walked past as if nothing were there, but I caught a few nervous glances in my direction. Whatever had visited me the night before was a common guest in Bleak Hollow. By the third night, I was ready to leave. The riches and luxury felt meaningless compared to the horrors I'd endured. I went to the mayor, demanding an explanation, but he simply shook his head, a twisted smile stretching across his face. "You signed the contract. Bleak Hollow keeps its promises, and so must you." Fear clawed at me as night fell, and I returned to my house, knowing I was trapped. As soon as darkness settled, the noises started again. This time, they were brutal. The walls shuddered as something massive thumped against them, dragging claws across the floor. Then came the voices, multiple voices, each one distorted, whispering in tones of despair and rage. Look at me, one hissed. Come to me, moaned another, each voice dripping with anger. A loud thud struck the door, rattling it on its hinges, and the voices grew louder, each one sounding more tortured and inhuman. I clutched a knife, knowing it was useless but desperate for any sense of safety. Just as dawn approached, the voices turned to shrieks of rage. Something slammed against the door, the wood splintering, and a foul, acrid stench filled the room. I nearly gagged, fighting the urge to scream as the voices crescendoed in one final, horrific scream. And then, silence. When I opened the door, a horrific sight awaited me. Blood splattered the walls, dark and thick, trailing down in long streaks. Organs, fresh and glistening, were strewn across the doorstep, like a grotesque offering. Among the scattered remains was a note, scrawled in blood, "You belong to Bleak Hollow now." I fled the village that morning, breaking the contract. But every night since, I hear them, the whispers, the scratching, the wet, sickening sounds. No matter how far I run, they follow, growing louder each night, waiting for me to break. I know I can't escape. I'll be part of Bleak Hollow's family forever.